So creativity for me really goes to the heart of everything. I mean, it's for me, it's on the level of consciousness, and I don't even know if I would differentiate between consciousness and creativity. Is consciousness creativity, or is creativity consciousness? So a question I had for you, Paul, and for you, Steve, too, is like, how do you experience creativity?
Well, for me, I like Blake's dictum, actually, which is energy is eternal delight. And I think of creativity as energy par excellence.
Energy functions.
And the experience of energy as being kind of bliss, and it does fit well with your concept of energy, creativity as being similar to consciousness. I think of the term Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness bliss, and the identity or the equivalency of being consciousness and bliss. And in that, I think we could add your understanding that part of the nucleus of being consciousness bliss is the effulgence of the creative state, the creative act. So that's how I understand it. What about you, Steve?
Well, I also think you're onto something there with the idea of there being bliss and pleasure involved, because often it is very pleasurable to be creative. That it's a driving force. And you're tapping me.
No.
Oh, okay. I think it's a driving force that's very pleasurable for people. I mean, I think some artists are driven to be creative because they feel they have to be. But I think there's pleasure, and I think that's a good sign that we're coming closer to ourselves. We're coming closer to our nature when we're being creative. So,
it is our nature.
Yeah, because our nature is inherently creative.
Mm-hmm.
It's always fresh. It's always arising out of mystery in every moment.
It's always fresh.
Yeah.
I think creativity is always fresh because that's the novelness of it. I think in its rawest form.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I would also ask it's like to look at it from more of an embodied place is how you actually experience it. So when you talk about pleasure, it's like, is that from what place are you experiencing it? And there's a reason I'm asking from, say, a body place about the experience of creativity.
Which is?
Because it's the body that dies. Right? So it's the body that loses something, right? It loses air, it loses, the life force or whatever it is that we're talking about. So what happens in our body with creativity? It's like, how do you experience it in your body? And you mentioned pleasure, you mentioned bliss. So what does that experience feel like? And how do you separate it from, say, bliss, being blissed out in meditation, for example, or in chanting? Would you consider that creative, or is that something else?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to pay closer attention.
Are you saying that the body is the only source of creativity, though? That if you don't have a body, you don't have creativity?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying is, what is the experience in the body, since it is the body that dies? What is the experience of creativity in the body?
I think it depends on the kind of creativity you're talking about. It can range all the way from mild pleasure to burning ecstasy.
Is that the creativity, or is that the response from creativity?
I'm not sure how you'd separate those.
So how would you discern between raging ecstasy whether it's from creativity or if it's from something else. Maybe you had a really good meal.
Well, I think in general I know when I'm having a creative moment or not.
See, this is what I'm asking you. How do you know? What's happening? What is your experience when that happens?
Well, I know my experience. I know it in the way that I know any of my experience. I just know it. I think that how you know your experience is actually a very difficult philosophical issue.
Mm. What is your?
But,
I mean, if you ask yourself, what is your direct experience of creativity? I mean, I'd be able to answer that.
Okay, how would you answer it?
Okay, so if I were to answer it, say right now, what is my experience of creativity in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can feel like a real fullness in my belly,
Mm-hmm.
and I can feel this this sense of aliveness that comes from that. I can feel a certain movement, a forward movement to express myself. So it feels squishy, and it feels sparkly, and it feels very buoyant.
So the question you asked me though was, how do you know that's creativity?
Well, I was asking you. It's like, how do you tell the difference when you're talking about raging ecstasy? You just know what your experience is. And it's like, well, how do you know? So how do I know that this is creativity for me? Is having I lost my train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know? Okay, how do I know this is creativity for me? So I feel this sense of like this sense of real longing potential that has a generative movement towards it. So it feels like there's like a fire that needs to be expressed, and that's creativity for me. It's this potential of this inner fire that has this fuel for expression. And I would say that creativity is not always, I think in its truest form, creativity brings pleasure and bliss, but it also can be, and maybe more in a skewed sense. I have to see how I feel about this as I'm talking about it, because it can be very frustrating too. And I think the frustration comes not necessarily from the creativity, but in the effort to express creativity. When you talk about frustrated artists, usually it's because that expressive expression, the expressive flow has been cut off for whatever reason, whether it's from a thought, this isn't turning out like I liked, or this is, I'm not able to get the energy out.
Are we recording still?
Yes.
Yep.
Can I take a quick break?
Mm-hmm.